Have you ever finished a workout feeling like you could barely move, only to assume it must have been a great session? A lot of lifters judge a workout by how exhausted they feel afterwards. The problem is that fatigue and muscle growth are not the same thing. Today, I want to explain one of the biggest misconceptions in strength training. More effort is not always more muscle. If every set ends in complete failure, you may actually be making it harder to recover, perform well in future sessions, and make consistent progress. Think about training as solving an engineering problem. Your goal is not to maximize fatigue, your goal is to maximize the muscle building stimulus while keeping fatigue under control. If you can create the same stimulus with less fatigue, you are in a better position to improve over the next week, month, and years to come. There are three ideas that matter. First is effort. Effort describes how close a set is to musculature failure. In other words, it's a measure of how much of your current strength you're using during that set. A set that ends with 5 repetitions still left in the tank requires much less effort than a set where you cannot complete another repetition. As you get closer to failure, your muscles are forced to recruit more motor units and produce more force to keep the weight moving. Effort exists on a spectrum, not as an all or nothing concept, and understanding where your set falls on that spectrum is important for managing both muscle growth and fatigue. Second, the stimulus. Stimulus is the signal your muscles receive, telling them they need to adapt and grow. Resistance training creates mechanical tension within the muscle fibers, which tells your body that its current level of strength and size is no longer sufficient for the demands being placed on it. In response, your body begins repairing and reinforcing those muscles so they are better prepared for similar challenges in the future. The goal of each workout is to provide a stimulus that is large enough to trigger this adaptation. More stimulus generally leads to more potential growth, but only up to a point, and it must always be balanced against the fatigue that the workout is creating. Third, fatigue is everything that reduces your ability to perform after a workout. It includes the tiredness within the muscles themselves, the stress placed on your nervous system, and the depletion of energy and recovery resources your body needs to repair and adapt. As fatigue accumulates, your strength, coordination, and ability to produce force temporarily decline, making it harder to perform at your best in subsequent sets or future training sessions. Fatigue is a completely normal and unavoidable part of resistance training, but it is not the primary goal. The objective is to generate enough fatigue to create a meaningful stimulus for growth while avoiding unnecessary fatigue that only increases recovery time without providing additional benefits. Many people combine these three ideas into one. They assume that if a workout feels harder, it must automatically produce a greater stimulus for muscle growth. That is true to a point, but eventually you begin to experience diminishing returns. Imagine doing a set of bench press and stopping with 1 repetition left in the tank. Then, imagine repeating that same exercise but forcing yourself to absolute failure, needing a spotter to help you finish that last rep. The second set was undoubtedly harder, but did it produce dramatically more muscle growth? Probably not. What it did produce was significantly more fatigue, though. As you push closer and closer to your limits, the additional stimulus becomes smaller while the recovery costs continue to increase. Understanding this relationship is one of the keys to training effectively. The goal isn't to maximize fatigue, it's to maximize the amount of muscle building stimulus you get for the fatigue you have to recover from. This is where reps in reserve, or RIR, becomes useful. RIR is simply an estimate of how many additional repetitions you could have completed before reaching muscular failure. Instead of asking whether a set felt hard, RIR asks how much capacity you had left when you decided to stop. For example, if you finish a set and believe you could have completed 3 more repetitions with good technique, that set would have considered 3 RIR. If you think you only had 1 more repetition left, that's 1 RIR. And if you attempted another repetition but could not complete it with proper form, you've reached 0 RIR. or a true muscular failure. While RIR isn't a perfectly precise measurement, it provides a practical way to gauge effort and helps you consistently train at the intensity you intend rather than simply relying on how difficult a workout felt. Most productive hypertrophy training happens surprisingly close to failure, but not necessarily at failure. Your muscles generally don't need to be pushed to their absolute limit to receive a strong growth stimulus. For many exercises, stopping with 1 to 3 repetitions in reserve is enough to recruit the majority of the muscle fibers responsible for growth while avoiding the excessive fatigue that comes from taking every set to failure. In other words, you can achieve nearly all of the muscle building benefits without paying the full recovery costs. This allows you to maintain better technique, perform more high quality sets throughout your workout, and recover more effectively for your next training session. Over weeks and months, that consistency often leads to better long term progress than constantly pushing every set to its absolute limit. That being said, training to failure still can be used if utilized properly. There are situations where taking a set all the way to muscular failure can be a useful tool. Isolation exercises, such as a bicep curl or lateral raise, generally carry less risk and produce less overall fatigue than a heavy compound lift, thus making them better candidates for failure training. Likewise, taking the final set of an exercise to failure or occasionally testing your limits can provide a useful information about your progress and ensure you've accurately gauged your RIR measurements. The key is that failure should be used strategically, not automatically. Making every set of every exercise a maximal effort often creates far more fatigue than additional muscle building stimulus, leaving you with a longer recovery period and potentially reducing the quality of rest of your training sessions. Every hard set comes with a recovery cost. You can think of it as a bill that your body has to pay before it's ready to perform at its best again. The harder you train, the larger that bill becomes. Now imagine two lifters who complete nearly identical workouts and provide their muscles with roughly the same growth stimulus. The first lifter takes every set to absolute failure, accumulating a tremendous amount of fatigue. The second lifter stops most sets within 1 or 2 repetitions still in reserve. Although both lifters challenged their muscles enough to stimulate growth, the second lifter paid a much smaller recovery cost. As a result, they are more likely to recover in time for their next workout, maintain better technique throughout their training session, and continue producing high quality repetitions session after session. Over the course of weeks and months, those small differences begin to compound. The goal isn't to see how much fatigue you can survive, it's to create enough stimulus to grow while keeping recovery manageable so you can continue training at a high level consistently. Progress comes from stacking together hundreds of productive workouts, not from surviving one heroic session. Building muscle is a long term process that rewards consistency far more than occasional extremes. Every workout should have a purpose. Performing each repetition with good technique, training with an appropriate level of effort, and gradually improving your performance over time. This is where concepts like progressive overload, exercise selection, and recovery all begin to work together. We'll explore each of these topics in much greater depth in future videos, but for now, understand that they all serve the same objective: making steady, repeatable progress. A workout that leaves you feeling completely exhausted isn't necessarily better than one that leaves you feeling capable of recovery and performing well again a few days later. The lifter who consistently strings together high quality training sessions week after week will almost always outperform the lifter who chases exhaustion every time they step into the gym. In the long run, sustainable training habits are what produce sustainable results. So, what should you actually do with this information? For most compound lifts, such as the bench press, squat, deadlift, or overhead press, aim to finish the majority of your working sets within 1 to 3 repetitions in reserve. This is generally close enough to failure to provide a strong muscle building stimulus while keeping fatigue at a level that is easier to recover from. Reserve true muscular failure for exercises where the consequences of missing a repetition are much smaller, such as a bicep curl, lateral raise, leg extensions, or any other isolation movement. Even then, treat failure as a tool rather than a requirement. Finally, judge your progress over weeks and months instead of individual workouts. Some days you'll feel strong and everything will move easily. Other days, the weights may feel unusually heavy despite doing everything right. That's a normal part of training and something we discussed in the previous video. Don't let one good or one bad workout convince you that your program is or is not working. Instead, focus on whether you're gradually lifting more weight, performing more repetitions, improving your technique, or completing more quality work over time. Those long-term trends are much more reliable indicators of progress than how exhausted you feel after a single session. The best workout isn't the one that leaves you crawling out of the gym. It's the one that provides enough stimulus to improve while allowing you to recover and perform well in your next session. Building muscle isn't about winning a single workout. It's about making steady progress over hundreds and thousands of workouts. When you learn to balance effort, stimulus, and fatigue, you'll spend less time chasing exhaustion and more time building results that last. Future videos will dive deeper into many of the ideas that we've introduced today, including progressive overload, recovery, training volume, and how to know if you're actually training hard enough. Each of these topics builds on the same foundation, understanding why your training works so you can make better decisions every time you step into the gym. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing so you don't miss future videos. Until next time, always train with intention. This is Strength by Design.